very much again. And I apologize for being a few minutes late this morning. Thank you for accommodating that. What I wanted to present here is co-written with David and with two archaeologists in Brazil, Mariana Cabral and João Saldanha, both of whom are the state archaeologists for the state of Amapá, which is in northern Brazil, just on the edge of French Guiana and Brazil, on the coast. And in the middle there you see João, between these two particular standing stones, or what we think might be standing stones, and he's working with his compass. And in fact, as I'll show you just now, both of those stones describe an arc that faces directly to the east. And the question I wanted to pose in this paper, and I would really value your discussion and your thoughts on it, is whether or not we might consider these to be significant. So what we're trying to do is link astronomical stories together with archaeological data from standing stone megalithic sites elsewhere, although I might add that my colleagues João and Mariana don't like us to use the word megalithic for reasons which I don't quite yet fully understand, but they prefer to use the term standing stones. So that's the particular site. Now, what is Araguas? It's a rock shelter known locally as Araguas, and in fact the word Araguas comes from the Spanish arquebus, which is the old shotgun, word for shotgun, two shotgun sites, which refers to those stones. It's in the state of Amapá, in the area indigena to Uaçá, the indigenous area of Uaçá. And as far as we know, there are at least 3 layers of historical interest here. The first is that just walking onto the site itself, you're literally crunching ceramics underfoot, potsherds of all kinds. And it's also a site that is very densely woven into stories of the wars between the Arawak and the Caribs, which are from archaeological records and from the accounts of travelers, would seem to have occurred between the 1600s and the 1700s. And that certainly matches a carbon sample from a site elsewhere that's also part of the same story sequence, where people were moving between the Quap site and this particular site. And we took a carbon sample from a trench that is mentioned in the stories, a particular trench that was dug as a defensive strategy against the incoming Caribs. And we went to that particular site called Quap and excavated in the place where people had said this had happened, and found that the stratigraphy of the site matched very closely what the story said should be there. And when we finally got our carbon samples updated, which is a story and a half, they were destroyed by customs initially as agricultural material and therefore prohibited. If you have any idea what it takes to get those carbon samples to a lab in the States and then get news that they were destroyed by customs, which was quite a story. Anyway, so it took us a long time to get the actual dates. But when we did get it, it was really, really exciting because it's a very accurate calibration, very low margin of error according to the lab, and they put it at between 1595 and 1620. So that matches very nicely the stories that are given. Now, in Araguas itself, when we went there just because David knew Old Man Wet as the woodcarver. This was back in 1997. And Wet had said it was an interesting place, and we said, well, can we go? And he said, sure. So we organized a long canoe trip. It's a good couple of hours by canoe, pushing through very dense waterways. And we finally got there and discovered this extraordinary site with these potsherds. And there was a particular place where we took shelter when the rains came down. Yesterday's rain has got nothing on an Amazonian rain. And took shelter, and here we were in the middle of the rainy season on an incredibly wet day, and the sand was as dry as the Sahara, and you could pick it up and it was like powder. I never saw anything like it elsewhere in the Amazon, just incredibly dry. And looked, lo and behold, there was a line of fragments of ceramics coming out from under the rock, and it was clear that an armadillo had been digging there and had been throwing out these potsherds, which included some bone fragments. Pretty quickly realized that it was an anthropomorphic, or known with anthropomorphic detail. come back to that a little bit later. Here's some of that material. I want to emphasize that that was not an excavation by any means, but that was some of the fragments, which included a shin bone, a human shin bone, that had been pulled out and pushed out of the hole by the armadillo. The Ivayotu, who's there, and Old Man Wedge was next to him, carefully put the materials together and reburied them. And we haven't done any further further excavations on that particular site. I think there'll be huge issues with regards to working with funerary remains, and I don't want to go near there. But it's a pretty good indication that it's there. The site itself, a couple of years later, when we had started to work with Joao and Mariana, I was back here in Cape Town, and David went with them to meet with them and to have a look at the site. And Joao developed this quite careful map of the site. I don't have the pointer, but there's 3 rock shelters which are the open circles. Here we go, the pointer. So these there and here are the actual shelters. And these are the standing stones that we're interested in. So it's quite a large site. And as I say, from at least the stories and the funerary remains that are there, we can confidently say that there were at least 2 periods of occupation of that site. One of which is not in memory, but the other which is in living memory. Now, I was fascinated by these 2 standing stones because they seemed so incongruous. And Amapá State, in that region in East Baganas, has got a record of standing stone sites, which Mariana and Joao have investigated much more thoroughly in recent years. That later. But what fascinated me was that with Joao's map, his compass rose, this is a magnetic compass, not true north, but the compass, you can see there's a pretty close alignment towards the east. The stones clearly mark an arc towards the east. Question, is it significant? Why should we think it might be significant? First of all, because there's a very big archaeological record in the immediate vicinity, and secondly, because of the ethnographic astronomical material. And our question in trying to develop this paper is, can we credibly put these together on this particular site? So I'm going to present some of the evidence that we're thinking about, and I'd really value your thoughts and comments as to whether it might be significant. Just to give you a sense of the part of South America we're working in, that's obviously the continent of South America, and in this corner over here is this map, that's the state of Amapá. This is the Atlantic coast, and there's French Guiana, Suriname, Venezuela going up to this part. So this is Brazil proper, and that's this tiny little thing here, which is the indigenous area. Now further south, I'm going to show some sites just now. Calçoene, which would be probably about 200 kilometers to the south. This distance from here to here is about 500 kilometers. So now, working on that in that Amapá area, further down to Calçoene, as I said, Mariana and Joao have mapped standing stone sites all across here. And they were one of the classic stories which were immediately picked up by the press as the Amazonian Stonehenge. You might have heard of those kinds of stories. Mariana and Joao kept a record of the press coverage and media coverage of the site. There was huge excitement about it. And Joao said he even found press clippings in Vietnam or Moscow about this site, which suddenly became a media event, which put them in a difficult position because they hadn't quite done the research. It was conjectural at that point. And so it put them in a difficult position because it made them look as though they were claiming what they hadn't yet claimed. So at that point, they developed a paper. Now, a couple of the slides that I'm going to show you now come from a paper that they wrote on these particular sites and presented at the Brazilian Archaeological Association. This was one of the standing stones at Calçoene, which has an inclination of approximately 23 degrees south, corresponding very closely with the position of the sun during the December solstice. And you can see on both sides, the north side and the south side of that rock, there is no shadow. And that's at the December solstice. So Joao took a series of photographs during the day of the stone actually marks the arc of the sun's path in the course of the day. Their questions themselves, this is again part of their presentation, was, is this an accidental alignment, or is there some technology underneath it? And they did some excavations under a broken rock. You can see this particular one that they chose was already broken, so as not to interfere with the ones that were still good. And they began to take it down and found what they find to be very, very careful positioning of the rocks, some very careful engineering, very careful stone placement around the rock to keep it in position. And what's of interest is that in later work that they've done, these kinds of sites are also associated with funerary urns that are buried deep underground in the classic round pots, which I won't go into now. So our research questions are, do these, to go back to the arrival site, do these two stones mark the two eastern points of the solstice? Well, first of all, a calibrated map, a properly calibrated map is needed, and I've been waiting for that to come through this week, but for some reason we've had endless email troubles and it hasn't, so I'm only working with True North at the moment, so this is rough. But in any case, the arc of the sun at the solstitial points is approximately 47 degrees. And the angle of the stones they're aligned at closer to 90 degrees. So that's kind of a bit odd. But then the second question for us is, well, can we be sure that the stones are actually marking the sun? Perhaps it's the rising of the rain stars. So to move then to some of the polychroastronomy, some of which I spoke about on Monday. But working with a cycle of stories, and we're looking at about probably about I think I would say about 1,500 to 2,000 minutes of stories that relate particularly to astronomical sites. So it's a huge range of stories that David has collected and transcribed and translated over a period of a number of years to consolidate this material, which we then published in the journal TPT in 2011. But what we proposed in that article was that there's a number of really important principles of Amazonian astronomy that emerge from the stories. And the key one is that, as I said on Monday, the heliacal rising, particular stars, the stars that are rising ahead of the sun, are key. And this is obviously a picture of, on the one hand, in the purple here, there's the arc of the Milky Way, and this is going to be the path of the sun in the course of the day. And they meet in this June solstice, and they meet again in the December solstice. So what we're interested in is what are the organizing principles of polychroast star knowledge? And the first of all is that what's very clear in the stories is that when the stars disappear into the western sky, in other words, when they're setting at sunset, and then gradually they're setting earlier and earlier until they're setting in the day sky, then they're out of view. But it looks as though they've set. The stories speak of them as having gone into the underworld. They would obviously be invisible to us in our day sky for about 2 months, and then would reappear at dawn in the east. And that's narrated as a journey through the underworld. So the stars that were the most significant were those who were appearing along the Milky Way at the point at which the sun would be rising. And now each of the different rays, I'll talk more about these carvings now. These are the constellations here. So each of the constellations speaks to or announces the arrival of a particular rainy season, of which there are 5 between December and May, and then there's a long dry season. So the second principle is that, as I said on Monday again, that's the backbone of that cycle forms the backbone of ecosystemic knowledge. So when people talk about the seasons and what each season is bringing in, it's very closely linked to what the constellation is bringing in. And I'll show you in a minute some photographs of this, for example, would be known as Pegasus. It comes in as a boat from the underworld, bringing in the bounty of the season. As well. So just to go through these quickly, these are the slides that I presented on Monday. That's the first rain, which is Kayed, which is Scorpius, roughly Scorpius. We can talk more about these in a moment. The second rain is Tabar, the kingfisher, which you see over there, in Altair. The third rain, Wachi. The fourth rain, Kusubui, which is Torrance, that's one of the 3 stars over there. And that's in late April and into May. And that speaks of a very much tightly wound up with the battle to stop Awawi, the giant 3-headed snake, 3-headed anaconda, which would be the monster that would swallow the world. And the cycle of stories is about heading off, so it goes back, which speaks to the turning of the sun, moving back in the other direction. So that's Awawi, the 3-headed anaconda, who really is big enough to swallow the world. And at the bottom is a picture of our wonderful friend, Wet, again, it's a wood carved note. And then finally there's the small rains, which come with Wayam, who's the trickster figure, the land turtle, who people say only brings a tiny little bit of rain because Wayam can only hold a little bit of water. In other words, he only has a little piss. So now what's interesting to me is that the movement of the stars that are ahead of the sun clearly creates a path in the dawn. And the sun is going to follow that path. So as the stars go up, the sun is going to follow that path. And it seems to me that the path of the sun across the sky is really, really important in the stories because it marks the path of where the stars are going to be when you can't see them. Now, what's interesting is that Edmundo Magana, who wrote extensively about Arawak stars, is he felt that the path of the sun provided that pathway of the sky and the reference of the horizon and the zenithal velocity. I've spoken already to the point about the December and June solstices, which provide the endpoints of the sun's journey. But as I said, the stones at Arrakis mark a much wider arc, and you see too in the stories a much wider arc being significant in the stars. If I can just go back to these images, if you look at where Scorpius is, look at where Scorpius is over here, which is Kayed. This would come here. It's rising much further to the south than the sun is. Similarly, the very significant is Perseus, which is the Awawi, the 3-headed anaconda, is rising much more to the north. So what's significant in terms of the stars is there's a much wider arc that approximates your northeast and southeast points. So let's go back to okay. So I also found it very interesting to read the work of Gary Urton, if you might be familiar with his book, At the Crossroads of the Earth and Sky. And that to me suggests that there might be that we need to be thinking about South American astronomy as a regional thing, because it seems to me that there's clear links to some of the Andean work. Similarly, there's clear links to some of the Carib astronomies. And so it doesn't make sense to start to tribalize it and say this is particularly Arawak Polycur astronomy. There seems to be a regional thing going on here. So now the importance of the solstices is not just that it's the endpoints of the sun, but that on that date the path of the sun crosses the celestial river, which is the Milky Way. And that river is the source of the rains. The Milky Way is the source of the water that comes with the rains. So bearing in mind this idea that the constellations, I beg your pardon, that the constellations are not flat pictures in the sky, but actual creatures that are carved easily but drawn with difficulty. It makes me want to think a little bit differently about try to push the understanding that we published in our paper in 2011. Because I think that paper, the limitations of that paper are that it still stays too much within the framework of astronomy. It's reaching out beyond that, but it's still staying within the paradigm of planes and so on. So what happens if we try to think a little bit more about these as being creatures and the pathways through the sky? Start to think about what does it mean that the river, the Milky Way is a river in the sky that is the source of the rays. Now, this is a picture that David drew, a map of the cosmology that David drew, and I think that really is probably the closest that I could offer in terms of thinking about a genuinely indigenous astronomy that isn't using formal scientific astronomy as its reference point. And David, do you want to talk a little bit more to this now or later? Or?
5 minutes between you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk?
Okay, this is actually a shamanic understanding of the stars, and what happened is usually the shaman, when they would take a hallucinogenic drug and then go into a trance-like state, they would usually actually travel on one of these constellations. And there's a epic narrative where a shaman travels to the west and waits for the constellation there. And in an epic narrative, he eventually comes back on the Pleiades, which is a Kusuri here. But it's a journey from, well, first of all, almost all rivers can be seen as being made by anacondas and conduits, and then in the landscape itself, there's lots of different portals. But the main ones are in the east, the Cotton Waterfall, where they would board the constellation and then travel across the sky. So this was and although they're also spiritual beings, so they can be seen as constellations, as odes, as kingfishers. But so the first one is Cayenne. But what this picture is helping to show is the movement. So it goes underneath and then back around like that. And that's basically the basic movement of going underground from west to east. When the constellations rise in the east, the water around here is called Kuyao, which means sharp water, but it's also a place of eternal renewal. So if someone travels on board one of these constellations, when they arrive on the other side and they jump into the water there, they become young again. And it's also where the trees bud and you have new life. It's like the beginning of a new season. The most important one is probably Kusungwi, which is this one here, which represents Orion's belt, Taurus, and the Pleiades. And on Kusungwi's boat, most of the shaman and people would stand in the back, and the front was an area where there were predator spirits. And it was also where different plants like the hallucinogenic drug and other healing drugs would be found. So basically when it arrives on the other side, that's actually the beginning of the season, where it's a change of season, it's the beginning of the harvest time, but it's also where fish, they have a small silverfish which goes into the rivers, and then all the other fish sort of follow that fish up, and it's sort of a big cycle it's an important cycle for the polygon.
Thanks very much. So, yeah, let's that's where we're at with that. Simply thinking that perhaps those stones are marking like the rising bit of key stars, not necessarily solstitial things. That's as far as I can take it right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.